Hi, this is Tapcat, and today I'd like to talk to you about the XCOM2 War of the Chosen campaign that we just finished. And since it was 2 versus the Overlords, it's only fitting that I'm not alone because Syken is also here so we can talk about the highs and lows, the triumphs and the tragedies, and to put it more simply, dig into what it was like to play a campaign with no less than 57 mods, as well as having to trust someone else with half of the gameplay time and living with their decisions. So as always, thank you for joining me, Syken. Are you ready to talk XCOM?
Absolutely, Tapcat. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. Thank you for inviting me for that project, and glad to be here.
Same. All right, so let's start with talking about the campaign as a whole and what it was like to coordinate it, because I know it was new for me. I assume it was new for you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what did you find, like, as we went through, what were kind of the biggest adjustments you had to make or deal with? And what did you think of it?
It's interesting, right? So I had 2 to 3 points noted down for that. Let's start with the first one. I think people don't appreciate just the complexity and effort that a collaborative campaign without a specific co-op modus brings with it. At the beginning, I must admit I have underestimated it because you and I agreed, you know what, let's just use the save game. We're using email. We ping pong it back like good old chess in the days before the internet was invented, right? And the reality of it is, if you do have a life and you're working in different time zones and so on and so forth, just playing it back and forth increase the difficulty substantially, because when I had time to record, you were busy and vice versa. So in between the recordings, it oftentimes was maybe a week or two, and the overall production process was just incredibly long. So that's the first one that surprised me. In hindsight, clear, but before we started it, not so much. The second topic that I found just difficult and challenging to deal with is having an overview about all of the decision making that has happened. So not only did we have a week or two break in between each of the episodes, but also things happened that you couldn't review because I wasn't seeing your videos during the time. So I only saw the final situation, which led to all kinds of inefficiencies. When do we research the next thing? What do we want to do? Have you deployed all of the engineers, etc., etc.? So I hope this is not going to be come too embarrassing, but when we were shifting over the commander seat from one person to the other, it, at least for me, was clearly noticeable that I needed to just catch up on what was happening. And then the third one was a funny, quote unquote, meta game that happened where I started to use certain soldiers, and then since they were tired, you chose other soldiers, and then you had your little SWAT, and I had my little SWAT, and then sometimes they were injured, so we were starting to use the soldiers of the other person, and then again sometimes just you needed to scrap the bottom of the barrel. But that was fun to see because we had kind of different SWATs. So those were just logistically the most noticeable topics. How about you? What did you think was the most noticeable?
Yeah, so obviously I was experiencing the same thing, so we're going to share a lot of this. This is definitely the least I ever played with a Templar because, yeah, like you said, you would tend to use the Templar on missions. And so then it would be my turn and the Templar's tired or the Templar's injured. And I think at the same time, what do you call it? The Scout class, the Reaper.
The Reaper. You had the Reaper, yeah.
I tended to use the Reaper a lot. The one that I wanted to use a ton, I think we both liked. We haven't talked at all yet about our favorite classes, but the Sapper was one that really I thought was one of the better classes from this mod we were using. And we only had 2. And that's not a lot of depth when you have fatigue and injuries and all this other stuff going on. And so, you couldn't always bring the group you wanted to bring. That's an issue even when you're playing by yourself because of, the things that are in the game. But it really was exacerbated in this. And partly because of the mod adding more classes, we had less depth with each one. And we'll talk about that more a little later when we get into the mods. But I very early on, I realized this is just how it's going to be, you know? And so one of the things that I decided internally is like, hey, I'm just going to look at that like it's one of the extra challenges we have in this campaign. Like, we picked all these mods to make the game harder and different than it normally is. And in a way, like, this is just one more mod. You know, like, I don't get to control the roster the way I normally do. Normally, I have a very specific way I approach the roster and managing fatigue and stuff. Well, I'm not the only one making those decisions now, right? And like, you have your way of how you manage it. So I can get upset about it, or I could be like, oh, wow, this sucks because it's not all my way. Or I can just say, hey, that is what it is. And that's fine, you know, like, that's just one more thing that I need to manage as part of the challenge of doing this campaign. But you're right, it's definitely an adjustment. And so was, again, I agree with you, like, thankfully there were times where we had a really nice rhythm going where I would do a mission and fire it off, and you would do it and fire it back. And we would just like ping pong almost, you know, where it was boom, 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 boom. And we would knock out some episodes really quickly. But then if something happened to one or the other of us that disrupted that, like, you're just stuck dead in the water. And when you get that save file back, you would have to kind of go through this whole mental thing of plugging back into the campaign, you know, because you've forgotten, like, what were we researching? And, you know, what was I trying to do with this, that, or the other? And I think the other thing that we both did, you can say we're guilty of, or maybe it's, you know, whatever. It's just, again, another thing that added a challenge level to it is we didn't do as much back and forth emailing to communicate our individual intentions as much as we might have. So sometimes when I emailed you the file, I would try to go out of my way to say, I started this or I did that. And sometimes you would do that, but a lot of times we just didn't. And again, I kind of just took that as like, it's part of the twisted fun of adding this extra challenge that I'm having to sort of divine what you're doing, you know, just extrapolate from what I'm seeing. And a lot of times, I don't know if you felt this way, but like, I've watched you play enough that I kind of know what you're going to do with some stuff, you know, or I can at least make an educated guess. But I did overall, I enjoyed it. And I would say, yeah, like, it was more difficult, but I just accepted that as part of the process. But it is something like, if someone else was planning to do something like this, you got to be up for it. I mean,
absolutely. And I think the biggest regret for XCOM2, if there ever was one, is that the multiplayer wasn't fully developed. That's a completely different topic in itself. But if you think about it, kind of the hot seat multiplayer that you would have with a War Tales or Jagged Alliance, where more modern games are helping to do that, it's just a different way of doing it instead of flip-flopping around. But I do agree with everything that you said, specifically also kind of knowing where the game was going. In a nutshell, we had an easy plan, tech up, make sure that we have good weapons and armor, and the rest sort of sorts itself out, hopefully. And luckily, we lived to tell the tale. But I would agree, like, the intricacies of should we go first into this direction, or have we optimized that and that? That was unfortunately collateral damage of the format that we were selecting.
Yeah. So the only other point I was going to make, I don't think I ever got upset because of a decision you made or anything, but where I would be upset is if I felt like, oh man, you know, I didn't do this as well as I could have. Even like, it was so funny. There was one mission and it made me laugh, but I felt bad at the same time. I had finished the mission, and then it was time to pick the next covert op. And I did what we do all the time, which is there was like one slot to fill, and there was no requirement for the type of soldier. So I just plugged in some random corporal or sergeant. And then like a day later in the scanning, a mission comes up and you can only send sergeants or lower. And there was like, we'd only had like 4 to begin with. And I had just sent one on this covert op. And so I'm like, oh my God. So I have to send this to Syken. And I just screwed him by sending one of the few guys we had who could do the mission. And at least if I were going to do the next mission, it's like, I'm the one who's going to pay the price for the decision I just made or the mistake I made. You know what I mean? Like if you let a bunch of guys get hurt and you don't hardly have a squad to put together, if you're the one who's got to deal with that, that's one thing. But when you're handing it off to somebody else, it's like, ooh, sorry. Sorry about that.
There's an extra pressure. I would agree with that. I had a similar moment where I think it was mission 2 or 3 that I played. So number 4 or 6 in the episodes, where I was extra greedy and I thought, you know what, I'll go in and I'll just go in with rookies and like one squaddy so that we get the maximum number of promotions. Turned out that was a really horrible idea because the mission itself was brutally difficult, and I lost a rookie as part of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, second or third mission that you're playing and you already start losing people. But luckily from this point onwards, it turned around and we kind of were ahead of the curve the entire time. That was one of the things that that made it so enjoyable. There wasn't really any saving your disaster campaign moment, since you aced most of the missions, and even when people were hurt, we still had a relatively deep roster. There was very seldomly like a point where, say, we had half of a SWAT wipe or a complete SWAT wipe, right, that would have set us back.
Yeah, I think the low points of the campaign as far as roster management still weren't that bad. Like, I definitely had missions, and I don't remember, you may have too, where there was essentially just enough guys to put together a team, and I couldn't really worry about what rank they were. You know, it's like, oh, I'm bringing 3 field medics, 2 are sergeants, you know. Like, if that's what I had, that's what I had, because that's who's not hurt or tired, right? But my fear was always like, well, what if I use these guys? They're tired, and now when I scan, we have another mission like 2 days later, you know? But that never really happened. We always were able to scan long enough that we had enough guys to man it and come back okay. And so, you know, we never had to fail a mission or something because we just literally couldn't put a squad together. And so that was good.
Exactly. Yeah, that indeed was. Which brings me to an interesting question, Tapcat. You talked earlier about the mods, and we wanted to discuss them anyways. So, I mean, one of the most noticeable ones clearly is the proficiency class mod that we had. So, what are your impressions about the new classes that you have seen?
So, I really liked some of them. As I say, I thought the Sapper was a really interesting one because it had a lot of the characteristics of my beloved Grenadiers. I think they've become my favorite of the vanilla classes, but also not like Grenadiers, right? Like, you got a shotgun, so now you have to worry about balancing, you know, do you want to get in close to take advantage of the shotgun or not? So I thought it was a really well-balanced class, but I'm sure you also felt what I did, especially early on, like shredding was really minimal. And yeah, man, that really added tension to this. So that helped make the sappers way more valuable once we were able to get them. I think you had to get them all the way to Colonel before we got that. But I really liked the Sapper. I loved the Marine. Like, there wasn't one thing in particular about the Marines. I just thought it was a really good all-purpose class. My biggest concern about the mod from the beginning did come true. which is that by having 6 classes instead of 4 at that kind of basic vanilla level, we weren't going to have the same bench strength, because you can just only develop so many soldiers during a campaign. And so I didn't love that in terms of just fun factor and having bench strength. But again, like, we were doing this to make it more challenging, right? Like, that was a big part of why. My least favorite class was probably the field medic. My impression, and I could be wrong, you'll have to tell me if I am, was that you liked them more than I did. But I probably wouldn't have even been promoting them up. Honestly, if I was just playing a solo campaign, and I really didn't also care for the tech specialists that much. If hacking weren't kind of mandatory, I don't know. I didn't hate. To be clear, they both have value. I'm not trying to say they don't, but I didn't love that they took what the specialist does, because for me, the specialist is always the class that I feel like I get the least out of in vanilla XCOM. And then they split it into 2. So it's like, oh my God, now I'm getting half. And they took away the gremlin ranged heals from the field medic. That's what really killed the field medic for me. So that's a lot. Let me shut up for a minute and give you a chance to respond to some of that.
Oh, that's super interesting thought. So, I mean, let's maybe start with the field medic and tech specialist topic. So, it's not a secret that I am a very big fan of the specialist class in vanilla. I personally think they are amongst the strongest classes of all, mainly because they enable and have unique options to save your campaign from falling apart, specifically the revival protocol, the ranged heal that you talked about, the fact that with 8 protocol you can essentially have 2 actions every single round. They're incredibly versatile. What I will say though is, by splitting it, it made a very difficult setup. I always felt that the tech specialist alone wasn't really carrying their weight too much. Short of the chosen sniper, where the sniping only costs 1 action, he really couldn't be in a position where he uses his ABC protocols and then also snipe at the same time. So before you got that, the class really lacked that feature. So I think that is the one criticism that I would have, that the chosen rifle made the class really, really strong, because all of a sudden he was a sniper, and on top of that had all of the protocols that he could use. So with it, it was a good class, but without it, it was a bit lacking. Then you kind of went into the whole route of instead giving him a normal rifle, and I think the class just had too little to offer in order to justify their slot, although they could act twice a turn. The field medic, I have mixed feelings about that. I never could use him in a way where he was kind of an Overwatch monster, like a Spark would do with Hunter Protocol, and then you trigger a pack and there are dozens of Overwatch shots. So I felt that was already missing, but the overall class seemed to be nerfed and tuned down, because all of a sudden you could heal just way better, but you needed to go to someone else. And I would agree that made it difficult to use the class. You completely needed to position differently. As for the other classes, I personally liked the Marine a lot, because the class was just very straightforward but incredibly strong in what they were doing. Just a lot of damage, to be fair. I like the Zapper potentially most of all of the classes, but I will say that the reason why I liked it the most is because the Zapper was the only one who truly filled the cover removal role. And the moment that was not covered by someone else, you were forced to use it. So my suggestion would be, say, just as a thought experiment, if the tech specialist had something that would reliably remove cover, then I think the tech specialist could be a very strong contender as well. The Marine has more grenades as a support, and the tech specialist has their protocols, so that would be a good setup. The last class that I wanted to shine some light on was the assault infantry. mainly because I found the mechanic of when to get an extra action curious and funny to use, right? So for starters, you could either get extra actions with melee attacks, or you could get it with shotgun attacks based on the status effect of the enemies. So there was an incentive of, say, disorienting someone with an ADC protocol, then shooting at them, and essentially getting an extra move and an extra action out of it. I just found that mechanic to work very well. One last general comment, if I may, and then I'll shut up because I talked a lot, is the actual leveling up of the classes with their passive bonus, and what you could do in the GTS in order to increase that. So you might have noticed that the GTS increases were not adding anything, but essentially they said rookies start with level 2 or level 3 of the class abilities. And I found that incredibly smart, because if you think about it, the GTS upgrade in the classical sense is just a flat power grab, and it makes the classes even better. What this upgrade does is it helps the classes at the beginning when they are weak at squatty rank with passive bonuses, and they rise to a rank where they would anyways gain the bonuses. So it adds 0 power at the ceiling, but it adds a lot at the flooring. So you are more inclined to take squaddies with you or low-level soldiers because they kind of have a passive bonus. That for me was clever class design, and I just wanted to highlight that.
That is interesting. Now, I have to admit, I probably have the least accurate read on the assault, because we really only had one that was a decent level, and she did kind of end up being on, quote, your squad. So I played with her on my team very little, especially at high levels. I did use her. I don't want to make it sound like she never once was with me. But because of that, I probably wasn't really exploring a lot, and I was probably using her just in a very straightforward way and not really digging deep. But other than that, yeah, for me, it was just sort of like, well, it's a worse ranger. That
is true. All of the classes, let's be clear, all of the classes are a downgrade from what you normally have. And that's the whole idea behind it.
Exactly.
To be fair, how they were intended to be used, and we did choose to not do that, is normally the author says you use a squad of 8, and you add kind of 2 hero classes to those 6. That is their intended use of it, to make it long war-esque, but in a different flavor. Let me ask you another question, because we now talked a lot about our squad and our sizing. How did you like the enemies? Like, what stood out for you and what is noticeable?
So I'm glad you asked that, because this was definitely one of the things I wanted to talk about too. I had played with a better Advent before, and I really liked it. But that was before War of the Chosen. So this was my first time playing with this iteration. And I liked it at least as much, partly because he got rid of a better Advent used to increase pod sizes unless you change the settings. And for War of the Chosen, he got rid of that. And I like it better this way, because it really messed with the turn limits and stuff like that the old way. But I like all the variants. Likewise, adding all these different psionic enemies was interesting. Now, I have to admit, a lot of them, since when I would see like a warlock or some of these guys that were pretty scary, my goal was just kill them before they can act. So they didn't necessarily come into play as often, to do anything. The one that was such a pain, but that is the point of these mods, is changing the priest so that every single time they would go into that sustain mode, and where they go into stasis, you can't kill them. So it's like if you're dropping them to what would be 0 health, you would always want to try to have a couple of guys on Overwatch to end your turn, so that when the priest comes out of stasis, you have a chance to kill him, because every single time they're going to come out of stasis and attack one of you. And so
I can full-heartedly agree with that. The sustenance ability that they do have is a pain in the rear. I think Long War did it better. In Long War, the priests have 100% sustenance, but depending on the overkill value, so the minus hit point, the amount of minus hit points that they have below 0 hit points when you do the killing blow, that reduces the chance of it. And if you overkill them by 4 or more, they 100% die. So you can intelligently set them up and then actually kill them. The other problem that I fundamentally have with sustenance is, and I mentioned that even in the playthrough, is priests, when they come out of sustenance, there is no guaranteed way of killing them. It used to be in vanilla that you could set them on fire or poison them, and then sustenance goes off, they take the tick damage and die. But they changed that, and now it is random. I've seen it either way. The second thing that you may or may not appreciate or know is stasis as an ability goes all the way up to the action stack. So it goes before Bladestorm and before Ready for Anything Overwatch. So nothing that you can do will go before that happens, which means if the priest, for whatever reason, decides to cast the stasis, they will get it through. So that's my gripe with it, because it has no real good counterplay unless you, I don't know, put an incendiary grenade underneath them and be lucky that they immediately catch fire.
Right. Yeah, because that was the other thing. Even going on Overwatch, they didn't always move. Sometimes they would just fire and then I wouldn't get my Overwatch shot. And so I'm like, damn, man, this is harsh. But you know, again, like you're using these mods to try to make it harder on yourself. So then it does seem a bit bitchy to sit there and complain that it's harder, but it is the kind of difficulty that I guess I don't necessarily appreciate, because it's like, what's my countermeasure here? In the end, Overwatch was about as good as I could get, because as you mentioned, I tried, you know, using dragon rounds or something like that. And I, at least the times I tried it, it didn't work once. So if it's random and it could work, I didn't even get to see that. Like so I just thought, oh, it doesn't work. So it's tough. It's tough. Now, one I wanted to ask you about specifically with the enemies. So we were also using a mod called a Better Chosen, where it was supposed to make their AI better. I didn't really see a whole lot of change there. So I was just curious, like, did you experience much difference with them at all?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the author of A Better Advent and all of the A Better mods, Derby K, he put a couple of explanatory words around the Better Chosen and what he thinks they should look like. And in his kind of game design, they shouldn't be extremely hard to fight, but they should be annoying and do a lot of will damage. So what I noticed is people were ultra tired afterwards because the Chosen deal much more will damage. The other thing that I noticed is they more often use their guns. So that I definitely have noticed, and they do have different abilities. For instance, the Warlock can easily go through mine shields. They no longer provide any protection against him. And the Hunter, for instance, has disabled. The Warlock also has a off-screen kind of weapon emptying ability. So instead of just summoning the zombies, he will just empty your weapon. So I've seen a bit of a different flair to what they were doing. I would say, me personally, I think the way that Long War has designed the Chosen is more akin to kind of ultra strong and hard fighting Chosen, that how I would see it. The way that Derby K sees it, they are a bit more, I would say, generals and leaders of Advent, and less so individual heroes. Not my personal taste, but it was okay. Other than that, I haven't seen much difference to them.
I have to admit, the Chosen aren't really my favorite aspect of XCOM to begin with. Like, I particularly dislike the Warlock and how he plays, and I'm only slightly, like, I also don't love the fact, I did see, so I didn't mention it, but you're right. I did see the assassin use her shotgun a bit more. But especially in the early game, to me, that's just like the cheapest thing ever because Overwatch doesn't do anything. So she comes running in from a mile away because she has almost infinite range, mobility. And so she comes running in, blasts your squatty with a shotgun. Okay, well, he's dead now. And then runs away. And it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I know you can stack the deck to kill my guys if that's what you want to do. Like, I don't really find that an interesting challenge. Likewise, I hate with the Warlock that he can mind control someone and a flashbang grenade does literally nothing. And if I can't kill him that turn, now I have to worry about this guy turning on us. I don't want to kill him, because he's my own guy. And just that there's just something about the way these guys are structured for the most part. I just don't dig it. It's not interesting to me. It's not fun to me. It's not the kind of challenge that I look at and go, wow, that really gets my brain going, So
I can see that, yeah.
So I know there's certainly people who do like them, and that's fine.
That is true. I overall like the Chosen in this campaign. I think we dispatched of them relatively quickly. So we had their weapons. That's always a good benefit. And funnily enough, I think in this campaign, we did the Black Site mission very, very late. I think all of the rulers and the Chosen were already down at that point. So a bit of a different interaction. The only other thing around mods that I just wanted to highlight was the maps. I don't know how you thought they were, but I personally thoroughly enjoyed them, and they offered very fresh breath of air.
So, in all honesty, I felt about the map mods the way I have in past campaigns when I use them, which is to say that I never even noticed that they're there. Once the campaign,
really?
Yeah, when I'm on a mission, I literally never am cognizant of like, oh, this is different or this is not different. They all feel the same to me. Like, I don't mean to say that a tunnel map feels the same as like the other worldly overland maps, but a tunnel map is a tunnel map. And the overland maps are pretty much, they all feel very samey to me for the most part. And a part of it is because as soon as I start moving my guys on turn one, I'm just thinking about where I'm positioning relative to cover and if I'm triggering a pod. And so I'm so thinking about the tactical stuff. The other crap is like just not even there for me. So
makes sense.
I'm glad that you enjoyed them and they didn't do anything to take away my enjoyment. But they also meant nothing to me. If we didn't have a single one of them active, it wouldn't have meant anything to me.
But see, you can also see it from the positive side. They were so immersive that you didn't even notice they were there.
There you go.
There you go. Fantastic. How was your overall experience? Did you enjoy beating up the Overlords?
Oh, so I forgot to mention that when we were talking earlier. I never saw them. I never saw the Ethereals in the whole campaign.
That's true.
So did you fight them?
No. And even more funny, we had the Raider faction Cult of Jiraiya there. Yeah. And I played with them beforehand. So that's a whole different faction. They come in. You have a couple of missions with them where that faction is like the Lost, kind of the third faction besides Advent. Uh-huh. Funnily enough, shortly before we went into the network tower, which I did, the Cult of Jiraiya lifted its Riri hat for the very first time and just said, oh, we're, by the way, also here when the game was over. So that was a bit of a sad miss because the Ethereals, I fought them before. They are really, really tough. And the Cult of Jiraiya is also fun because they have their own mission. You can then covered ops, go to their headquarters and clean out the headquarters and even get a unique weapon, I think, the Blade of Jiraiya, that you could give the Templar. So that would have been cool, but I guess not this campaign.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I had, when I was just getting ready to record this video, I was going through the mods again to refresh my memory because no, I did not have all 57 memorized. And I saw the Cult of Jiraiya one. I was like, did I fight them? If I did, I don't remember that at all. I didn't even remember that they were supposed to be in the campaign. The Ethereals, I knew we had picked that one and that we were supposed to fight them in the late game. And so I was surprised that I got all the way through and I never saw him. And I was like, well, hopefully Syken got to fight him at least a time or two. But so that's so funny. So you saw them, what, like one time at the end?
Yes, I think one time at the end, the Cult of Jiraiya. And I don't even know if I saw the Ethereals once. Might be in this campaign or in my previous one. It was at one mission where I evac'd and then an Ethereal kind of came in last round, but didn't even really fight it. But I know they are super strong from my other campaign that I played. Like they are the ultimate psi enemy. Reduced weapon damage, reflection of weapon damage, ignore weapon damage, and very, very strong psi abilities on top of it. So I wanted to actually fight them, but yeah, unfortunate.
Maybe I'm glad I didn't have to fight them. They sound very difficult.
Well, they have their fair share of abilities. Let's put it that way. They are actually really, really strong. No, but overall, a good campaign. I really enjoyed it. So it was a little bit like you mentioned, whenever a new enemy came in, specifically the Fanatics or the Psyops or the Raptor squads, I was like, okay, these guys need to die first, and then we take care of the rest, because they oftentimes had really, really bad abilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I did see that. Obviously, I was killing them any chance I could get, but I do think there was a time or two where I got hit pretty hard, by one of these guys. And I'm terrible trying to remember the names of the different, enemies and stuff, especially when they are all some derivation of kind of the same name. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like they were definitely, some of these guys had nasty abilities. And even like, here's the thing for me, just the fact that you're using a psionic attack. So now my cover means nothing. And I'm sure you're the same as me, that look, all things being equal, I'm there trying to get a clean run, right? I want 0 wounds taken if possible, because fatigue is sidelining us enough. I don't need to have somebody in the infirmary for 3 weeks, right? So if I know that cover doesn't mean anything, and if this guy lives to target one of our guys, bang, they're hurt, they're going into the infirmary, and the only question is for how long. Well, I mean, he's definitely at the top of my hit list. So yeah, I certainly was going after them as soon as I possibly could, pretty much every time. So
true. Very good. So I enjoyed it, Tapcat. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to kick off a co-op campaign on your channel. Really, truly appreciate it. So it was, I think, the first real full cooperative campaign. And after we did the Saving Your Disaster campaign, this one here was kind of the full movie to the trailer that we did beforehand. So really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here. And I really appreciate that we were able to do that together. Also, I have to give you props because you're the one who really did the research to find all these damn mods. I was certainly up for it, but it's like, I am not someone who plays with a ton of mods. There's a handful of quality of life ones that I use all the time, like Gotcha and stuff like that. And that was pretty much my only contribution, just so people know. Like, really, Syken did the work to find all this crap. I shouldn't call it crap, excuse me. Find all these mods. And a lot of people worked really hard on some quality mods. So I don't mean to denigrate it that way. But no, it's fun. And it's not, I wouldn't want to play every single campaign with that many mods because they can be a little dizzying. But it's such a cool change of pace. It really is. And to kind of have a lot of what you think you know, like, Oh my God, especially in the early game, it's so different when you know you can't rely on a sectoid to waste its turn, raising a zombie or something like that. It's like, no, this SOB is going to shoot us. I have to deal with that. And it's good. It's good to, especially when you're playing something like XCOM, to kind of get taken out of your comfort zone. And I don't know about you, but I would definitely say, like, between the mods and the passing the save file back and forth, mission accomplished. I got taken out of my comfort zone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was very, very different to what I had done beforehand. And I hope that the kind of change of pace between how you approach the missions and how I do, and just the overall different nature, gives a fresh breath and makes the entire Let's Play meaningful and enjoyable for the viewers.
I agree. And that actually makes me think of something. On the off chance we ever do something like this again, I would be really curious to hear from people. Like, tell us in the comments, was there a particular aspect of this that you either particularly enjoyed or something that you wish we'd have approached a little bit differently? And then we can learn from that. If we, no promises, but if we ever did something like this in the future.
Very good.
It is quite an undertaking. I think we both agree on that.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. But it was equally fun, so not out of the question.
Yeah. All right. Do you have anything else to add?
Not from my end, Tapcat. I think we're good.
All right. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Syken, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for watching. I hope to see you next time.